The hut was made of cracked mud and broken bamboo, leaning like it too was too weak to stand. In its shadow, the rest of the village whispered and moved quickly, careful not to glance too long in its direction. The sun had long since passed its mercy, and the air inside the hut boiled like a trapped curse. But 16-year-old Kina lay still, her wrists tied above her head with braided rope hardened by time and spite. Dust clung to her skin, her tongue sat like dry cloth in her mouth, and her stomach coiled on itself, groaning so loud she thought even the termites in the walls might hear it. Outside, the forest loomed, not green, but withered, brittle like bone. The villagers said the trees were dying because Kina's mother had once walked among them barefoot, whispering names into the bark that should never be spoken aloud. Now her daughter, half mother, half mystery, lay starving in the hunger hut, accused, condemned, and caged. The girl blinked slowly, her eyes sticky with sleep and sun. Each breath came like a whimper. She stared at the ants near her toes, watching how they marched past the crumbs someone had dropped days ago. She imagined scooping them up with her fingers, licking the dirt just to feel something on her tongue. She dreamed of roasted yams, the kind her father used to make on festival nights, wrapped in banana leaves, their smell thick with smoke and salt. But he was gone now. Dead. And they said she did it. She hadn't even seen him die. She only remembered the bowl, how she helped stir the soup, how her stepmother, Nandira, had watched from the doorway with that stone smile. And then screams. And then silence. And then shackles. The village had gathered without trial, without word from the elders. Nandira's voice had filled the air like oil. She carries her mother's shadow. The same poison. The same curse. Do not feed her. Let the hunger strip it out. They dragged Kina into the hunger hut and tied her wrists high enough that her legs barely bent. No water. No food, Nandira had commanded. Let the spirit starve. Now it had been 3 days. Or 4. Or longer. She didn't know anymore. The sun came and went without apology. She learned to count time by the itch of insects on her arms, by the way her thoughts slowed into dreams even when her eyes stayed open. Outside, footsteps passed. A child's gasp. Then hushes. Don't look, someone whispered. But she's still alive, a boy murmured. Alive now, the voice replied. But if she eats? The rest was silence. Sometimes, at night, she heard voices around the hut. Older ones. The healer's chant, low and cracked like a dying drum, if she eats, it begins. What began? She had no idea. Only that she was not allowed to eat. Not even crumbs. Not even grass. The ropes cut into her wrists now. Her mouth bled at the corners. Her legs had gone numb. Still, she watched the ants. One of them crawled over her toe. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just whispered to it, voice so soft even the walls couldn't hear, "Take me with you." But the ant turned away. Even it was afraid. Before the hunger, there was a fire. Not one of flame, but of warmth, fleeting, quiet, a father's gentle hands pulling apart cassava root, pressing it into his daughter's palm. Kina remembered those evenings like distant songs. Her father, Bako, wasn't a loud man, but when he cooked, the air felt full of stories. He used to say, "Food is how we speak without mouths." And when he smiled at Kina across the cooking pot, she believed him. That last night had started no different. Kina had fetched water from the stream, her feet muddy, her hands cold. Bako had handed her the gourd of crushed spices and asked her to stir. The fire crackled, their pot bubbling with stew, goat meat, smoked okra, and a splash of palm oil. Her stepmother, Nandira, stood near the door, watching with folded arms, saying nothing. As always. The food was shared between the three. Bako ate heartily. Kina less so. Nandira barely touched hers. By midnight, the air turned sour. Bako's body had twisted on the floor, foaming at the mouth, clutching his belly as if something monstrous moved inside him. His skin turned gray before the first scream could summon help. Nandira shrieked, throwing herself on the floor, tearing at her wrappers like a mourning widow. "He is dead," she wailed. "He is dead, and she killed him. The girl with the cursed blood." They didn't question her. No one asked why she had barely eaten. No one asked why the goat meat smelled faintly of something burnt, something sour. No one looked at Kina, only at the spoon she held, the silence on her lips. The dawn dragged her into the square. Her arms tied. Her dress torn. People gathered like crows around rot. Nandira stood tall, her voice rising above all others. She cooked the stew. She stirred the poison. "This is no child, this is a shadow with skin." Kina screamed her innocence, but it was like screaming into the wind, swallowed, gone. The elders, once protectors, did not speak for her. Their eyes were already filled with fear. Fear that her mother's name would rise again, Obi, the woman from the mountain that sings, who disappeared into the cliffs one night after whispering to the rocks. Rumors said Obi was from the old tribes, the forgotten bloodlines that drank salt from stone and fed on shadow, not grain. They'd tolerated Kina because Bako was respected. But now he was gone. And the girl was no longer a child. Her body had begun to change. And so had their patience. A thin old priest stepped forward, bones clicking beneath his robe like dry leaves. He said, "The blood must be burned clean. But flame alone is not enough. Do not feed her. Let her hunger cleanse her veins. If the hunger leaves her alive, we will know her heart. If it kills her, it is mercy." And that was it. They dragged her across the dirt, past the watching eyes of children, past the house she once called home. She saw her father's sandals still by the door. No one had moved them. They threw her into the hunger hut, not built for protection but punishment. No windows. One hole at the top to let in heat. They tied her up. Left her with nothing. Sealed the door. In the first days, Kina screamed. In the next, she cried. Then silence. Until one night. The door creaked open, just slightly, and a hand slipped inside, carrying a small bowl of water. The hand trembled. Kina blinked into the darkness. It was Tebu, a boy from her village, younger than her by 2 years. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I heard you crying." Kina could barely nod. He held the bowl to her lips. The water was warm and tasted like wood and smoke. She drank greedily. Then he pulled back. Why don't you give me food too?" she croaked. Tebu hesitated, fear flashing across his face. "They say, if you eat," he said softly, "you'll become something not meant to live among us." Kina looked at him. Her throat burned with more than thirst now. "Do you believe that?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just backed away and closed the door. Even he, the kindest among them, was afraid of what might happen if her hunger ended. On the 7th day, Kina could no longer feel her legs. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes had sunk so deep into their sockets they no longer blinked. She had stopped crying on the 4th day. By the 5th, her stomach had curled in on itself like a grieving hand. The ash pit she was chained in had turned cold, but the sun did not stop watching her. It hung over her like a cruel face, its heat a silent laugh. The villagers had not come that day. Not even Niger. They had forgotten her. Or perhaps they wanted her to disappear quietly, like all things they used and discarded. But the world is not a clean place. And it never forgets what it swallows. On the 7th night, when the sky had turned bruised and the insects began their low chants, something moved in the woods beyond the ash pit. At first, it was just a rustling, a soft friction, like a blanket being dragged over thorns. Then, a groan. Kina, too weak to lift her head, barely noticed. But the sound came closer. Closer. Until it was right outside the small cracked window of the hut where she'd been chained. Then, a thud. Not loud, but final. Like a last heartbeat. And then, silence. She didn't know she had slept until a voice pulled her out of the dark. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, as if someone had leaned into her skin and whispered directly to her blood. She must eat. Let the world remember. Then, a rattle. Wood against stone. Kina blinked. There, lying on the floor near her chained hand, was a thing. Charred. Gnarled. Twisted like it had been pulled from the earth against its will. It was no fruit. Not a yam. Not cassava. It didn't even smell edible. It was a root, blackened, oily, and steaming faintly, though no fire had touched it. Kina stared. Was this another hallucination? Was her mind feeding her dirt in the shape of mercy? But the air had shifted. The air knew. Outside the window, the dead woman lay face down, her fingers still reaching through the bars. She had crawled. With her dying breath, she had come, not to beg, not to speak, but to offer. She must eat. Kina licked her lips. The root pulsed once, as if sensing her. And then she did what no one expected her to survive long enough to do. She took it. Her fingers shook so badly she dropped it twice. But finally, with breath like glass and eyes that burned, she placed it between her teeth. The moment she bit down, the world turned inside out. She did not chew. The root chewed her. It split in her mouth like bark soaked in blood. The taste was ashen lightning. It seared her throat, scraped her lungs, and dragged her heartbeat backward. Her body convulsed. Her hands slammed the earth. Her back arched. Chains rattled. Screamed. Melted. A low sound left her mouth, not a scream, not a word. It was the sound of memory remembering itself. And then, visions. She saw teeth, thousands of them, snapping in the dark. She saw women with fire in their mouths, being drowned. She saw a hand reaching for a bowl, and that bowl turning into a mouth, swallowing back. She saw wolves in human clothes, feasting on silence. And above all, a sky without stars. Because the stars were falling. One by one. Like judgment. She could not breathe. Her breath came in black frost. The ashes beneath her turned to glass. And then, nothing. When the villagers came the next morning, they brought ropes and sticks. Not out of pity. Just to dispose of what was left. But the door was already open. The hinges had melted. The chains lay in coils like dead serpents. The air inside the hut was cold, unnaturally so, like the breath of a cave that hadn't seen sun in 1,000 years. And Kina was gone. There was no trail. No footprints. Only the root, or what remained of it, a faint circle of ash burned into the floorboards. Some say they heard a voice whisper in the trees that morning. Others claim they found the old woman's body with a faint smile on her lips, her bones already turning into roots. But no one ever claimed to have seen Kina leave. Because she didn't leave the way they expected. She had eaten something older than justice. Something deeper than death. And it had fed her back. Not just into life. Into memory. And memory, once eaten, never forgets. The forest had always been dry and dying, a place where even birds sang hoarsely, and leaves crumbled like ash underfoot. But as Kina stepped barefoot between the roots, it felt strangely alive. Not lush or welcoming, but alert. The trees leaned slightly as if listening. The air, though thick with heat, pulsed faintly, like the forest was breathing with her. She didn't remember leaving the hunger hut. Only the taste of the blackened root, bitter, earthy, burnt, and the woman's voice in her ears, whispering words that seemed older than fire. She must eat. Let the world remember. Now, her chains were gone. Her wrists bore burns where the iron had once dug in, the metal melted clean off her skin. But there were no scars, just smooth flesh and a slow, quiet pulse that thrummed beneath her bones. Her body still begged for food. Her stomach groaned with the weight of days. Yet she walked as though held up by something beyond flesh. Her feet bled from thorns, but she didn't limp. Her skin was sunburned, but she didn't sweat. Every pain she felt was dim, distant, as if her body was a room someone else had entered and begun rearranging. The first animal she saw was a fox. It stood in her path, tail twitching, eyes golden and still. It did not growl. It did not flee. She stepped closer. It lowered its head slightly, then turned and walked ahead, as if guiding her. She followed it through a narrow path of brambles and brush. There was no sound but her breath, which came slower now. Colder. By midday, she collapsed near a dry riverbed, her hands trembling. Her mouth was too dry to cry. Above her, vultures circled once, then veered off, uninterested. And then came the sound. A flutter. Sharp. Desperate. She turned her head and saw a small bird near the stones, one wing twisted awkwardly. It had fallen from a tree, or perhaps from the sky. Blood dotted its feathers. It shivered, not from cold, but from knowing. Kina crawled toward it, slowly. Her mouth opened. She didn't think. There was no thought, no guilt, no morality. Just hunger. An instinct. Her tongue touched the blood on its wing. Warm. Metallic. Familiar. The moment it hit her tongue, something inside her shivered. Not her body, her being. A ripple ran through her spine, up her neck, into her jaw. Her teeth clenched. Her skin flushed. Her breath fogged the air, though the sun blazed down. The bird chirped weakly and died. She stared at it. She had not eaten its flesh, only tasted the blood. But the change had already begun. That night, she stumbled into a shallow stream, desperate to cool her burning skin. She knelt, splashed water on her face, and looked up. The girl in the water was not the same. Her eyes were darker, not from hunger or shadow, but from something deeper. The whites were tinted with gray. Her pupils stretched slightly, less round, more like a cat's in dusk. Her lips were pale. Her breath, when she exhaled, turned to mist. She touched her face. It felt the same. But her reflection flickered. Once, it smiled while her own mouth stayed still. She scrambled back from the river, heart pounding. Something had awoken in her. Something that was watching through her eyes. That night, in the village, people tossed in their sleep. Children woke screaming, clawing at the air. Elders gasped for breath, claiming shadows sat on their chests and whispered in their ears. One woman saw her dead husband standing at the edge of her bed, mouth sewn shut, pointing toward the forest. By morning, word spread, the girl is not dead. She walks now, someone whispered. She walks, and the trees remember. A hunter named Jaluko went into the woods that morning, claiming he would find her and finish what Nandira had started. He was proud, strong, and cruel, known for beating his dogs and stealing meat from the communal pit. He did not return by nightfall. Instead, his goats were found scattered across his pen, all dead, their throats torn open, their eyes wide and black with fear. But there were no tracks. No blood trail. No sound. Only one goat remained alive, huddled in the corner, foaming at the mouth. When approached, it screamed, a sound no goat should make. Nandira, upon hearing this, lit incense and placed charms on every doorway. She forbade her children from speaking Kina's name. Whatever that girl was, she hissed, she is not anymore. Kina wandered deeper into the forest. She was not fully awake yet, not fully aware of the thing inside her. But it stirred often now. When she closed her eyes, she saw flashes. A mouth lined with obsidian teeth. Hands with skin like bark, reaching up from soil. A woman's voice singing in a language she did not know, but felt in her bones. And wolves, eyes shining, running across snow that did not melt. She would wake from these visions with her nails digging into tree bark, her breath fogging the air, her body curled like a beast. She was still Kina. But the hunger in her was no longer just for food. It was for memory. For bloodline. For return. She could feel it now. She was not meant to survive. She was meant to awaken. The market was busiest near noon, when the sun burned hottest and the air smelled of salt, sweat, and drying cassava. But on that particular day, the wind refused to move. The chickens were silent. The smell of roasting fish lingered without life, and even the flies buzzed lower to the ground, as if wary of what hovered above. She came walking through it. No announcement. No horn. No song. Just silence, and then Kina. Her feet were bare and bruised, the soles dark with forest earth. Her dress hung in shreds around her knees. Her hands were empty, and her lips did not move. But her eyes were black, not with bruises or paint, but with something underneath, like an ocean at midnight. Her skin no longer looked sunburnt or weathered, it shimmered faintly, like heat off stone. And though the air was sweltering, her breath drifted visibly from her lips, a soft, cold mist that curled into the heat like smoke from an unseen fire. People parted for her. Not out of kindness, out of instinct. Mothers pulled their children behind stalls. The old palm seller crossed himself 3 times before shutting his basket. A young boy dropped his gourd of milk and ran. No one shouted. No one asked where she had come from. They knew. Behind closed doors, her name had not stopped whispering. Not once since the morning the hunger hut was found with melted chains and empty shadows. Kina, they whispered. The one who ate the seed. They had buried that old woman who crawled from the woods, the one who had flung the blackened root into the hut and died muttering prophecies with her last breath. They buried her far from the village, under rock and salt, with no prayers. But some said her body had turned to ash before the sun fell that day. Now the girl walked again, and she didn't ask for food. She didn't need it. The first man who had struck her across the back, the butcher, thick-handed and cruel, began to scream at sunset. His mouth opened wide in his hut, mid-chew, and then sealed shut like wax in fire. No cut, no thread. Just flesh, smooth and still. His wife tried to pour broth into him through his nose, but he choked, eyes wide, fingers clawing at his lips as if remembering the slap he once delivered with glee. The second to suffer was a woman, the one who had spat in Kina's face when she was dragged across the square. She bit into a mango and gagged. Every fruit in her home had turned gray, dry, and hollow. Her stew hissed on the fire and dissolved into smoke. Even the water from her pot turned to ash on her tongue. Her belly shrank over the next days, but not from hunger, from rejection. The food no longer entered her. It disappeared before reaching her throat. And then, Nandira. She tried to stay awake at first. Refused to sleep. Poured cold water on herself every night. But the vines came anyway. In dreams, thick, thorned, and pulsing with breath. They crept under the door, slid across the floor, climbed her bed. Wrapped her throat. Tightened. She woke gasping, clawing at her neck, blood on her sheets, the marks visible even after dawn. On the 3rd night, she screamed to the elders, "Do something. Call the priest again. Stop her." But the priest was gone, vanished into the forest 2 days after Kina returned. His staff was found near the hunger hut. Burned. Blackened. The old healer, hunched and shaking, heard their pleas. He only shook his head. "It's too late," he whispered. "She's eaten the seed. She is the vessel now." "What vessel?" they cried. He wouldn't answer. That afternoon, Kina stood at the center of the market. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She only looked. At everyone. And as her eyes passed over each face, many flinched. Some wept. A few dropped to their knees. One woman collapsed and wailed like her soul was leaking through her mouth. She said nothing. But they all heard her. Not in sound, in memory. In that space between silence and guilt, she spoke to them. Of pain. Of hunger. Of the way their eyes looked when they watched her starve and said nothing. She reminded them of who they were. And they broke. That night, fires weren't lit. Doors stayed locked. Drums remained untouched. Even the birds sang nothing. They knew now. The girl they had starved was not gone. She was not merciful. She was not dead. And worst of all, she was no longer someone they could punish. She was punishment itself. It began with a message carved into wood. No messenger delivered it. No voice announced it. Just a plank left at the edge of the square, leaning against the old drum tree, the one where announcements were once nailed during times of war and famine. The village hadn't used it in years. The message was carved in a language that no one remembered learning, yet every person who saw it understood. Come to the clearing at dusk. There is food. All are welcome. No signature. Just the invitation. Whispers ran like fire through the thatch roof homes. Some said it was a trap. Others said it was an offer of peace. But it was the elders, proud and stiff in their shame, who made the final decision. We will go, Elder Dano declared. She is just a girl. And this is our land. We do not bow to curses. But none spoke the truth. They feared if they didn't attend, something worse than curses would come. So they dressed as if for a celebration. Beads, wraps, anklets. They brought their families, though many children clung to their mothers, crying without cause. The sun began to sink as they walked, single file, toward the old forest path. The clearing was not as they remembered it. Where there once were dry stumps and thorns, now sat long tables carved of obsidian wood. The air buzzed faintly with scent, spices, roasted yam, smoked fish, sweet honey cakes. Steam curled into the dusk air. Fruits glistened with dew that had not fallen. Jars overflowed with stew and drink, their scents both familiar and strange. And at the head of it all sat Kina. She did not rise when they arrived. She sat at a high-backed chair made of roots and bone, her hands resting gently on her lap. Her eyes held the forest, the sky, and something deeper still. She said nothing. She simply gestured, one sweep of her fingers. Eat. No words. No threat. Just the gesture. And so they sat. Plates were already set. The cutlery cold and shining. No one served. The food simply was. Every dish laid perfectly in front of the right person. Some hesitated. Some glanced at one another, waiting for someone else to begin. But Elder Dano, ever proud, ever foolish, speared a piece of roasted goat and placed it in his mouth. He chewed once. Then stilled. His eyes blinked, once, twice, and he began to tremble. He reached for his throat, not choking, but shaking. He gasped, stood up, and looked down at his hands. His skin began to bubble, blistering as if boiled from the inside. He screamed, but not in pain. In memory. Because what he saw, what they all saw now, was not food on the table. It was what they had done. The woman who had spat at Kina tasted fire on her tongue and saw her own face, twisted in cruelty, reflected in her bowl. The man who kicked her while she lay in chains bit into bread, only for it to turn to worms in his mouth. As he spat them out, he saw himself laughing, torch in hand, as Kina wept beside her father's corpse. One woman reached for fruit and saw her dead child instead, the one she'd told to stay quiet when Kina screamed from the hunger hut. Another tried to drink from her cup, but it turned thick and black, like blood that had curdled. Each bite unlocked a sin. Each swallow brought them face to face with the versions of themselves they had buried. And Kina watched. She did not eat. She did not blink. She sat still, the mist of her breath curling like smoke in the cooling air. Some villagers began to flee, or tried to. But the forest had closed around the clearing. The trees had bent inward. The path was gone. Nandira ran first. She knocked her chair over, scrambled through the roots, clawed at branches. She ran until her legs bled, until her lungs howled. But no matter how far she ran, the clearing stayed ahead of her. The tables. The food. Kina. Over and over again, she ran and returned. By the fourth time, she dropped to her knees. "I fed you," she screamed. "I gave you shelter. I raised you." Kina tilted her head, as if studying an insect. Then, for the first time in the entire evening, she spoke. "No," she said. "You starved me. And now I remember what you fed me instead." Her voice was quiet, but it cracked the air like thunder. Nandira clutched her stomach and began to retch, but nothing came. Only her own breath turned to smoke, pouring out of her mouth, curling back toward the table. Back to the food. The feast fed on them. It was not food at all. It was memory made flesh. Grief cooked into yam. Shame roasted into meat. Cruelty mashed into cassava. Every dish was a mirror, every swallow a confession. The more they ate, the more they saw. Some begged for forgiveness. Others howled until their voices disappeared. One man clawed out his own eyes, unable to bear the sight of who he had once been. When it ended, only the wind remained. The tables were empty. The food was gone. And the villagers sat slumped in silence, not dead, but hollow. Eyes open, lips trembling, each trapped in the truth of what they had done. Kina stood. The chair behind her sank into the earth. She walked slowly past the tables, her shadow stretching unnaturally long behind her. As she passed each person, they flinched, not from fear of her now, but fear of who they had been. And they knew, she did not curse them. She had only fed them what they themselves had served. Justice, disguised as generosity. Vengeance, plated as a feast. She did not look back. The forest did not ask her to. Her feet, now calloused and cracked from the days of starvation, touched the path like she was part wind, part shadow. Around her, the air held its breath. Behind her, the village no longer spoke. No songs. No cries. Just the slow crackle of cooling ash, a field of bones folded into themselves like prayer beads scattered after a funeral. At the edge of what used to be the village square, only one thing remained untouched, a carved wooden bowl, full to the brim with thick, steaming stew. No flies buzzed near it. No animals dared approach. It sat there, still warm, as though waiting for another to arrive. But no one ever did. The first to come were curious travelers, cloth traders from the next village. They arrived mid-morning and joked about the silence as they passed empty houses and fruit stalls rotting under the sun. One of them reached for the bowl. Another warned him, "Don't. Something watches." But it was already too late. His fingers dipped into the stew, and he collapsed without a word, eyes wide open, seeing things the others could not. The rest fled, screaming that the earth had swallowed the village whole. Word spread faster than fire in dry grass. The nearby settlements heard first. At dawn in Bofuma, a little girl named Lila woke up with blackness swirling in her eyes like ink in water. She smiled at her mother and said, "Mama, I dreamed of a girl who never ate, and now I am full." Her mother gasped, dropping her spoon, but when she called for help, her voice sounded hollow in the hut. In Ganji, an entire family vanished in one night, leaving behind only bowls at the doorstep, clean, empty, but lined with a thick black resin that no one could scrub off. In the city of Care, a kingdom built on stone towers and golden spears, the king heard of this girl-shaped hunger. He scoffed. "She is a tale," he said. "Send 50 guards. Bring her head." The guards rode with lions painted on their shields and blades kissed by fire. They never came back. Instead, their horses wandered back one by one, eyes blank, skin cold, saddlebags carrying only black feathers and cracked bowls tied with vine. No message. No blood. Just the smell of something old. From there, fear swallowed the continent. Old temples reopened. Altars were rebuilt with trembling hands. Offerings of yam, honey, meat, and even blood were left at crossroads in the hope she would pass them by. In sacred circles, the name Kina was no longer said. She became Nzali Wanja, the hunger that remembers. But she was not angry now. She no longer heard Nandira's voice in her dreams, or the priest's sermons in the square. Those sounds had burned away in the flames of the feast. She was empty. And yet full. And still, she walked. Through deserts, where vultures circled but never landed. Through rivers, where fish swam backwards to avoid her shadow. Through mountain passes, where old stone faces wept dark moss as she passed. She listened for pain. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that is buried beneath laughter, buried beneath gold. She entered a market one night, quiet as hunger entering a child's belly. No one saw her arrive. But by morning, every merchant who had once sold watered soup to orphans woke to find their own children mute, their eyes black, their mouths full of salt. In another town, a widow fell to her knees after dreaming of a feast where everyone fed her until her stomach burst, but all the food was her own memories, cooked and served back to her, steaming. And still, she walked. The elders whispered, "She is not girl. She is not ghost. She is what we bury and pretend not to hear." Children began to draw her shape in ash beside their beds, not to call her, but to say, "I remember too." In every home where a daughter had been ignored, or punished for crying, or blamed for grief, there came a soft tapping on the walls at night. Not threatening. Just there. Present. A sound like knuckles on a pot with no food in it. Not long after, village to village, mothers began whispering new lullabies. "Close your eyes, child, hush the pain. The girl who hungers walks again. If your soul is cruel, beware her feet. For what you give, one day you'll eat." They didn't know if she still bled. They didn't know if her mouth still held a human tongue. But they knew she listened. They knew she walked. And they knew that somewhere, in a quiet place between the worlds of truth and silence, Kina still waited to taste the stories they were too afraid to speak aloud. She sat beneath the twisted fig tree like a shadow stitched from old grief. Her feet were blistered, though she no longer felt pain. Her eyes were dry, though they had seen every form of weeping. And in her lap rested her hands, calloused, powerful, quiet, the same hands that once held bowls of ashen flesh and memory. Now they held nothing. Around her, the forest did not breathe. No birds sang in the branches of the fig tree, whose trunk curled like a question no one dared ask. Its leaves were sparse. Its bark cracked like lips chapped from begging. She waited. Maybe for another sin to echo through the roots of the world. Maybe for silence to settle fully inside her. But instead, she heard footsteps. Light ones. No tremble in them. No fear. No guilt. Just curiosity. A girl emerged from the path, barefoot, small, with a white cloth over her eyes. Her hair was matted with dust. A stick guided her steps, but even without eyes, she seemed to see something others could not. Kina did not move. The girl tilted her head. "I smelled the ash," she said. "But I also smelled maize." Kina blinked. The girl came closer, one cautious step at a time, until she stood before the fig tree. Then she reached into her little sling bag and brought out roasted maize, still warm, charred in some places, golden in others. She held it out with both hands. Kina stared at it. Her breath caught. The girl smiled. "You're hungry, aren't you?" For the first time in what felt like centuries, Kina spoke. "I do not eat peace," she said, voice like cracked glass. The girl frowned. "Then what do you eat?" Kina looked away. "Guilt. Pain. Memory. It is what the world has always fed me." "Well," said the girl gently, "I've only got maize. I don't have much pain. Just these 2 ears and 1 heart. And I think it's still soft." The fig tree creaked. Somewhere far off, a wind held its cry. Kina raised her hand. The air thickened. Her fingers shook. Her hunger rose like a storm behind her ribs. But the maize, it smelled of firewood and soil, of someone waking early to roast it with care. It smelled like something untouched by cruelty. She took it. Slowly. Held it. Her hands trembled. Then, her shoulders. Her spine. her breath. And finally, her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. And another. But the moment they touched the ground, the soil hissed, as if even the earth wasn't ready for her sorrow. She clutched the mace to her chest and wept, silently, violently, until her bones remembered what it meant to ache for something other than vengeance. "You are not like them," she whispered. The girl smiled again. "Then forget the rest. I give you this food in peace." Kina looked at her. Looked into eyes she could not see. "How do you know who I am?" "I don't," said the girl, "but I know who you are not." Kina said nothing. Behind her, the wind shifted. A fig dropped from the tree, plump, ripe, and perfect. Another fell. Then another. Within moments, the twisted branches burst into bloom, leaves returning like forgiveness, flowers like laughter held too long. The forest breathed again. Birds returned. And Kina stood. She placed a hand gently on the girl's head. "You have fed me truth," she said, voice now low, tender. "Not of the past, but of what still can be." Then she turned and walked. Not fast. Not vanishing. Just walking. The soil no longer burned beneath her feet. Where she stepped, the grass rose green. Behind her, the fig tree glowed, no longer a monument to sorrow, but a shrine of mercy. People say it still stands. That if you place roasted maize at its roots, the birds will sing louder. That if you listen, you'll hear two voices in the wind, one soft and blind, the other fierce and healed. And somewhere far away, the hunger that remembers walks still. But now, she is not just hunger. She is also the memory of kindness. And even curses, when fed gently, can learn to sleep. The elders say it is only a story. A tale stitched with shadows, passed from grandmother to granddaughter over hushed fires, whispered like prayers or warnings, soft on the tongue, sharp in the blood. But there are places where the wind does not forget. And in one such place, a clearing hidden by time, scrubbed clean from all maps, there stands a fig tree with bark as dark as night and roots that twist like old veins. It is gnarled, quiet, and heavy with memory. Every year, on the first moonless night of the hunger season, the tree bleeds. Its sap runs red, thick, slow, and warm, down its trunk, dripping into the earth like a wound that remembers when it was made. Children ask their mothers why. And the mothers reply. It's not sap. It's the taste of her name. No one speaks that name aloud. But some still remember it, carved in dreams, etched behind the ribs of the guilty. In that same village, every year, someone leaves food at the base of the tree. A bowl of warm ugali. A roasted yam. Crushed groundnuts wrapped in banana leaf. Sometimes it's a handful of salted maize, nothing more. And with the food, they leave a whisper. Not a prayer. Not a plea. A truth. One girl once knelt and said, "I lied about my sister's joy," and she stopped singing. An old man once muttered, "My wife cooked every day for a house that never thanked her." A mother said nothing, just left a small necklace made from her daughter's broken combs. By morning, the food is gone. Sometimes the tree leaves something behind, a black feather. A clean bone. A small stone warm to the touch. Once, a mother found her own voice carved into a gourd, whispering back at her. The villagers never ask where the food goes. They only say, "If it is taken, she has heard you. And if it is not, you were not honest enough." Children grow up learning a strange proverb that no school teaches, but every fire tells. Fear not the girl who hungers, fear what feeds her. Because something did feed her, long ago. And it wasn't just food. It was memory. It was silence held too long. It was laughter taken too soon. It was kindness offered too late. Her name, though no longer spoken, tastes bitter and hot in the mouth. It is a name that walks. A name that remembers. Some say she still roams. Not as a woman, but as something else. A story that can breathe. A hunger that walks upright. They say she's been seen in the distance, a figure beneath a black sky, moving slowly across dry land. Her back straight. Her feet bare. Her head high. But it's her shadow that people fear. Because her shadow is not hers anymore. It stretches too long, too wide. It eats the stars behind her. It drinks the light. And wherever she passes, no lies survive. Only truth. Only the taste of pain spoken aloud. Only the sound of memory, swallowing.